In the quiet of the night, as you settle down and prepare to drift into rest, let your mind wander gently across time. Tonight, we will walk slowly through history. The story you are about to hear is not rushed, it is not loud, and it asks nothing more from you than to listen, to breathe, and to allow the words to carry you away. There are many voices across history, many stories left untold, and sometimes, if you wish to keep listening to these forgotten tales, it helps to return again and again, to continue the journey step by step, night by night. That way, the stream of history never stops flowing for you, and you always find new calm places to rest. Close your eyes, release the noise of the day, and allow yourself to drift. In this soft voice, we explore truths that have been hidden, truths that reshape the way we think about civilization. We are told, in most of our textbooks, that history begins with men. Men hunting, men building, men ruling, men fighting. Yet beneath those stories lies a deeper, quieter current. That current reveals something different. It reveals that the first sparks of civilization may not have come from men at all. Instead, they came from women. To understand this, we must return to the very beginning of settled human life. For hundreds of thousands of years, humanity survived as hunter-gatherers. Small groups wandered across plains and forests, following herds and gathering roots, berries, and plants. Survival was always uncertain. But then, around 12,000 years ago, something began to change. People began to stay in one place. They began to plant seeds. They began to shape the earth, tame animals, and create permanent homes. This moment, called the Neolithic Revolution, is often described as the dawn of civilization. What we often forget, however, is who played the central role in this transformation. Archaeology suggests that women were the first to experiment with gathering seeds, planting them, and observing how they grew. It was women, responsible for feeding families and knowing the cycles of plants, who may have first realized that seeds placed in soil could produce food for the future. This quiet discovery reshaped everything. With agriculture came stability, with stability came villages, and with villages came the foundations of civilization. When we look at the ancient sites of Çatalhöyük in Anatolia, dating back more than 9,000 years, we find clues to this forgotten story. Çatalhöyük was not built around warriors or kings. There are no palaces or monuments to military power. Instead, there are shrines filled with symbols of fertility, of mothers, of the life-giving female form. Figurines of women with wide hips and powerful presence suggest reverence for female strength, for the role of women in sustaining life. These artifacts are quiet but powerful evidence that early societies may have been centered not on men, but on women. The image of the mother goddess appears again and again in prehistoric art. Across Europe, from the so-called Venus figurines carved more than 20,000 years ago to the Neolithic statues of goddesses, the female body was celebrated as the source of life, fertility, and continuity. These were not decorations, they were sacred symbols. They represented the understanding that survival and community rested upon the nurturing, organizing, and sustaining roles of women. As agriculture grew, women's responsibilities expanded. They stored food, developed pottery for preservation, and created weaving techniques for clothing. These activities were not secondary. They were foundational. Food security and clothing allowed communities to expand, trade, and prosper. In many ways, it was these skills, these daily labors of women, that made civilization possible. The myth of male-centered history grew later, when power shifted toward warriors, chiefs, and kings. Writing, often controlled by male scribes, recorded the deeds of rulers and conquerors. Wars, battles, and dynasties filled the pages, while the daily contributions of women, contributions that truly sustained life, were left in silence. Yet archaeology allows us to read beyond those silences. It reminds us that long before men wrote history, Women lived it, shaped it, and carried it forward. Consider, too, the role of fire. The hearth was the center of the early home, a place of warmth, cooking, and protection. Women often tended the fire, ensuring it never went out, passing the flame from generation to generation. Fire was more than a tool. It was a symbol of continuity, of the thread of life that never broke. The one who held the flame, in many traditions, was the woman of the household, the guardian of light. As you listen, let your mind drift further back. Picture a group of people gathered in a circle, in the quiet of night, thousands of years ago. In the center burns a fire. Around it, mothers and daughters prepare food, share stories, and keep the community alive. Men may have hunted and brought back meat, but it was women who created the structures of daily life, who gave rhythm and meaning to survival. Civilization began not with battles, but with meals, with homes, with seeds placed gently in soil. Let the rhythm of this truth wash over you. Civilization began with women. Civilization began with mothers, with grandmothers, with daughters. Their names are forgotten, their voices are gone, but their actions remain in every grain of wheat, every clay pot, every hearth that once glowed in the dark. As you drift toward rest, hold this quiet recognition: the world you know exists because of them. And as you rest, know that there are many more stories like this one, stories waiting to be told night after night, each one a gentle reminder of the forgotten truths of history. If you wish to continue discovering them, to keep returning to these calm journeys through the past, you may find it comforting to stay close, to follow along, so that each night the flow of hidden history can return and carry you into sleep again. Now breathe slowly, let the sound of the words settle in, and allow your mind to wander. The story will continue, deeper and deeper into the forgotten past, where the roots of civilization lie waiting. Let your breathing remain calm as the story continues. History unfolds slowly, not in sudden bursts, but in gentle layers, one after another, like quiet ripples across still water. As we move further into the past, the voices of the earliest communities grow faint, yet they remain present if we listen carefully. Tonight, we journey deeper into the fabric of early civilization, exploring how societies were shaped by patterns of daily life, by rituals, and by the enduring presence of women at the center of human development. After the first great transition into agriculture, human communities became larger and more stable. Villages grew around fertile lands, near rivers and valleys that could provide water, food, and shelter. Life was no longer only about moving with the seasons and following herds. Instead, people built permanent homes, crafted tools for farming, and created shared spaces for rituals. In these places, the foundations of organized society began to form. Archaeological evidence tells us that in these early settlements, the role of women was crucial. At Catalhoyuk, for example, houses were built close together, with no streets, connected by rooftops. Inside these homes, the walls were painted with symbols, and small shrines were built. Many of the figures found there were female, representing fertility and continuity. Such evidence suggests that communities placed reverence upon women and upon the idea of life that women embodied. The society was not ruled by kings or warriors. Instead, it was guided by the rhythm of the household, the storage of food, the keeping of fire, and the shared traditions that centered around the feminine principle. Other Neolithic sites across Europe, such as those found in the Balkans and along the Danube River, also reveal a similar pattern. Figurines of women with strong, powerful features have been uncovered. These were not trivial decorations but sacred symbols, carved with care. The presence of these artifacts suggests that early agricultural societies were not patriarchal in structure, but were oriented around reverence for women and the principle of fertility. The goddess figures represented abundance, survival, and the promise of life renewed. These early agricultural societies also developed rituals that connected the cycles of nature to human existence. Planting and harvesting were tied to ceremonies, many of which celebrated female deities or symbols of fertility. The sowing of seeds was not seen merely as a physical act, but as a sacred exchange between the earth and the community. The act of placing a seed in soil, of nurturing it until it grew, was directly connected to the nurturing role of women in sustaining families. This deep symbolic connection between women, earth, and fertility shaped the religious and cultural outlook of these early peoples. Over time, the settlements expanded, and trade began between different groups. Pottery, textiles, and food were exchanged, creating networks that stretched across regions. Women, as central figures in the creation of these goods, played a major role in early trade. Pottery, used to store grain and liquids, was often crafted and decorated by women. Textiles, woven from plant fibers and animal wool, were also part of women's work. These activities created not only the basis for trade, but also the cultural symbols that identified each community. Through the hands of women, culture itself was woven, painted, and shaped. Life in these early villages was not without struggle. Harvests could fail, animals could die, and illness could strike. Yet it was through cooperation, shared resources, and communal living that societies survived. Women's roles as caregivers, healers, and organizers of the household were essential in ensuring survival. The ability to pass down knowledge from mother to daughter, from one generation to the next, created continuity in times of uncertainty. When we examine the graves of early Neolithic peoples, we often find women buried with care, with offerings that suggest respect and reverence. Jewelry, tools, and figurines accompany them, signaling their importance within the community. Unlike the later tombs of kings filled with weapons and wealth, these early burials reflect a society that valued life-giving roles over conquest. It was not the warrior who was central to the story of civilization, but the woman who nurtured, sustained, and guided the community. The shift toward patriarchal systems came much later, with the rise of larger cities and organized states. As warfare and territorial expansion became dominant forces, the focus of history changed. Male leaders and warriors came to occupy central positions in recorded history. Yet this shift does not erase the long periods of time when women were at the heart of human development. For thousands of years before kings and empires, women guided the rhythms of daily life and shaped the very possibility of civilization. It is important to remember that history is not only what is written. Much of early human history was never recorded in words but in symbols, artifacts, and traditions. The silence of the written record is not the silence of the past. Archaeology allows us to see beyond that silence and to recognize the traces left behind by women whose names are forgotten, but whose influence is undeniable. As you continue listening, allow your mind to imagine the quiet of an ancient village. Picture the sun setting over fields of wheat and barley. Imagine the sound of weaving looms, the crackle of fire, the voices of women teaching children and passing down stories. Civilization is not only about battles and rulers. It is about meals prepared, seeds planted, fires tended, and homes kept safe. These daily acts, repeated over generations, are the true foundation of society. In this way, history becomes less about great events and more about continuity. It becomes a story of survival, of adaptation, of the gentle persistence of human communities. Women stood at the center of this persistence. Without them, the leap from wandering bands to settled villages, from uncertainty to stability, might never have occurred. As the night deepens, let this understanding settle in your mind. Civilization is not a monument to power but a quiet unfolding of life, carried forward by those whose labor, care, and wisdom made survival possible. And so, as you drift further into rest, remember that history is not just the story of men in battlefields. It is also, and perhaps more deeply, the story of women who shaped the first homes, the first rituals, and the first steps toward what we now call civilization. Let this thought accompany you as you rest. Behind every field sown, every hearth lit, and every child raised, there was a woman whose contribution was essential. The traces remain, even if the names are lost, whispering through time, guiding us to see history not as it was written, but as it truly unfolded. The story continues in the quiet expanse of time. As humanity moved from scattered settlements to more structured villages, life became increasingly intertwined with the cycles of nature. People observed the rising and setting of the sun, the waxing and waning of the moon, and the changing of seasons. These observations were not only practical but also spiritual. Early communities connected their daily activities to the rhythms of the natural world, creating rituals and symbols that guided behavior and gave meaning to life. In the earliest settlements, women were central to the management of these cycles. They planted and harvested crops according to lunar patterns, prepared food for the entire community, and maintained the hearth, the source of warmth and sustenance. Women's work was closely tied to survival, yet it also inspired the first signs of organized religious practice. Small shrines, figurines, and symbolic carvings suggest that reverence for life and fertility was fundamental. These practices honored the female principle, acknowledging the central role of women in sustaining communities. Anthropologists have noted that the earliest temples and ceremonial spaces were often aligned with natural features such as rivers, hills, and the positions of the stars. Within these spaces, women likely played critical roles in leading rituals and ceremonies. They guided the preparation of offerings, the chanting of prayers, and the transmission of knowledge to younger generations. These early ceremonies were not only spiritual but also social, reinforcing community cohesion and ensuring the continuity of traditions. In regions such as the Fertile Crescent, evidence of early agriculture shows that women managed grain stores and organized food distribution. They invented pottery for storage and developed techniques for preserving food through drying and fermentation. These contributions were vital, allowing communities to withstand periods of scarcity and enabling population growth. With stability came more complex social structures, and yet the foundations of society remained closely connected to the activities and knowledge of women. Symbolism in these early cultures is particularly striking. Figurines representing pregnant women or women with exaggerated features have been discovered in sites ranging from Europe to the Middle East. These figures may have been used in rituals, serving as reminders of the importance of fertility, nourishment, and care. In some cases, they were intentionally buried or placed in shrines, suggesting reverence and respect for the continuity of life. The recurring appearance of such figures across different cultures points to a shared understanding of women's central role in the formation and survival of society. Trade networks also began to emerge as settlements grew. Communities exchanged not only food and raw materials but also cultural ideas and religious symbols. Women often facilitated these exchanges, carrying knowledge of weaving, pottery, and domestic crafts across regions. The transfer of skills and traditions strengthened connections between communities and allowed cultural practices to spread and evolve. Women's influence was thus not limited to their immediate households. It extended across regions, linking distant societies through the shared practices of daily life. As settlements expanded, so did the need for governance and organization. While leadership roles were often assumed by men, the infrastructure and continuity of villages depended on women's management of resources, care for children, and coordination of communal tasks. In essence, the early state or organized community could not function without the often invisible labor of women. Their work created the stability upon which social hierarchies could develop, making it possible for larger, more complex societies to emerge. Religious practices further illustrate the central role of women. Many early myths and stories center on goddesses or female spirits who embody the forces of creation, fertility, and sustenance. These figures were not peripheral. they were central to the understanding of the world. They represented the essential truth that life itself comes from women, and that human survival is intimately connected to their presence and care. The veneration of these deities influenced art, architecture, and ritual practices for centuries. It is important to recognize that this influence was not always visible in later historical records. As writing developed, male scribes often recorded the deeds of warriors and rulers, while the labor and spiritual contributions of women were left unrecorded. Yet the archaeological record allows us to glimpse these foundational contributions. By examining homes, graves, artifacts, and shrines, we can understand the profound impact of women on the development of early human society. In imagining these ancient worlds, picture the rhythms of life in a small village. The sun rises, women tend the fields, children learn from their mothers, and the community gathers around shared tasks and rituals. Fire is lit each morning and maintained throughout the day. Crops are harvested, stored, and prepared for consumption. Through these seemingly ordinary acts, civilization is slowly, quietly, built. Every pot, every basket, every field tended represents the careful, persistent work that sustained life and allowed communities to thrive. Let your mind rest in this vision of the past. The sounds are soft, the movements slow, the days long and steady. Civilization was not built on grandeur or conquest, but on the careful, patient work of women who organized, nurtured, and sustained life. In this quiet understanding, we can appreciate that the roots of human society lie in these acts, repeated over generations, forming the stable foundation upon which all later achievements were made. Now, as your thoughts drift further, imagine the continuity of these practices over centuries. Each generation passing knowledge to the next, each family contributing to the growing web of human settlement. The presence of women at the center of these cycles is constant and enduring. Their influence, though often unseen in the written record, echoes through time, forming the backbone of human civilization, one quiet, steady step at a time. As we move further into the quiet expanses of history, imagine the first small villages gradually growing into larger settlements. The transition from scattered homes to compact communities allowed people to share resources more effectively and to develop more complex social structures. In these early urban spaces, life was still deeply connected to the cycles of nature. People observed the sky, the changing seasons, and the behavior of animals. These observations guided planting, harvesting, and ritual practices. In these larger settlements, women's roles remained central. They continued to manage food stores, tending grain and other crops with care. They prepared meals for extended families, taught children essential survival skills, and organized the daily rhythms of life. The centrality of women in these communities can also be seen in the artifacts they left behind. Pottery, woven goods, and other domestic items were not only practical but also often decorated with symbols representing fertility, protection, and continuity. These objects reflected an awareness that women's labor was both functional and symbolic, sustaining life while also preserving cultural meaning. Early cities such as Jericho and Catalhoyuk provide insight into how society functioned during this period. Homes were built with attention to both practicality and communal cohesion. Roofs were used as walkways, walls were decorated with murals, and shrines were often located within the household. The presence of female figurines and representations of goddesses in these spaces underscores the importance of women in guiding both spiritual and practical life. These figures served as reminders of the sacred nature of fertility, the cycles of growth, and the enduring power of women in sustaining communities. Religion and ritual became more organized as settlements grew. Seasonal festivals, planting and harvesting ceremonies, and other communal activities provided structure to the year. Women likely played central roles in leading rituals, preparing offerings, and instructing younger generations. By maintaining these traditions, They helped preserve knowledge of the environment, agriculture, and community cohesion. This continuity ensured that the settlements remained stable and could expand over time. Trade networks began to develop during this period, connecting communities over larger distances. Women contributed significantly to these exchanges through their craftsmanship and knowledge of domestic production. Pottery, textiles, and food products were commonly traded items, and women's expertise was critical in producing these goods. Through trade, cultural practices spread, and communities adapted ideas and technologies from one another. Women, often at the heart of production and domestic organization, facilitated these exchanges, linking distant societies and strengthening regional cohesion. The rise of organized settlements also brought the need for governance and coordination. While male leaders may have assumed visible authority roles, the continuity and stability of daily life depended heavily on women. Their oversight of domestic spaces, organization of resources, and care for children allowed communities to function effectively. These foundational contributions often went unrecorded in written accounts, yet they were essential to the survival and growth of early civilization. Throughout this period, the reverence for goddesses and female figures remained a consistent theme. In addition to fertility, these deities were associated with protection, wisdom, and the cycles of life. Figurines and symbols representing these qualities have been discovered in various settlements, suggesting a widespread understanding of women's central role in both spiritual and social spheres. The symbolic and ritual acknowledgement of women reinforced their importance in the community and in the preservation of cultural practices. Consider the daily life of a small city during this era. The sun rises, and women begin their tasks, preparing food, caring for children, tending domestic animals, and maintaining fire. They organize grain storage and distribute provisions. Throughout the day, they teach, repair, and manage the rhythms of home and community life. These seemingly ordinary tasks are, in fact, the backbone of civilization, allowing larger social structures to develop and endure. As night falls, rituals and storytelling become central once more. Communities gather to honor deities, recount histories, and reinforce cultural norms. Women lead these gatherings or play critical roles in their organization. These practices ensured that knowledge, traditions, and social cohesion were transmitted from one generation to the next. In this way, women were not only caretakers of households but also custodians of culture and memory. Reflecting on this period, we see that civilization was constructed gradually, through persistent, deliberate acts of organization and care. Life in early settlements required cooperation, attentiveness, and respect for the forces of nature. Women, through their daily work and their participation in spiritual life, were central to these processes. Their labor provided the foundation upon which all subsequent developments, trade, governance, and art could be built. As you listen, allow your mind to picture these early communities: the sound of children learning, the warmth of fires and hearths, the rhythm of planting and harvesting. Civilization is not a sudden event, but a steady unfolding of human ingenuity and care, anchored in the quiet, consistent contributions of women. Their influence echoes through time, forming the basis of all that was to come. As we move forward through time, let your mind remain calm and steady, gently following the unfolding of human history. The early settlements, once small and scattered, began to grow into larger communities with increasingly complex social structures. These early forms of organization set the stage for the development of the first proto-states and the earliest cities. Life in these communities required coordination, cooperation, and careful management of resources. Those who maintained continuity and stability in the household, often women, were central to the functioning of society. It is in this context that we find the first evidence of structured leadership and emerging social hierarchies. While men often occupied visible positions of authority, responsible for defense or external relations, The steady work of women within the household and community ensured that these societies could endure. The organization of food, management of domestic resources, and care for children were essential tasks that allowed these early cities to thrive. Women were not merely participants. They were indispensable to the continuity and cohesion of the community. Consider the archaeological sites of early Mesopotamia, such as Uruk and Eridu, dating back over 6,000 years. These settlements reveal a growing complexity in architecture, social organization, and religious life. Temples were constructed, large communal spaces were organized, and craft specialization emerged. Yet despite these changes, women remained central to the life of these communities. They continued to manage essential domestic functions, care for the young, and maintain the rhythms of daily life. Their labor provided the stability necessary for larger social systems to function. Amidst this growing complexity, spiritual life became increasingly important. The worship of female deities and goddesses continued, reflecting the recognition of women's critical role in sustaining life. Rituals and ceremonies were often led or guided by women, and these practices helped preserve knowledge and maintain social cohesion. The centrality of goddesses in early religious systems points to an enduring awareness of women's foundational contributions to human society. Even as early written records began to emerge, chronicling kings, conquests, and monumental achievements, the contributions of women often remained unrecorded. Yet these contributions were never absent. They persisted quietly in homes, workshops, and fields. Every meal prepared, every seed planted, every child nurtured contributed to the strength and continuity of the community. The foundations of civilization rested upon these ongoing, often invisible acts. And so, as you continue listening, imagine that you are walking quietly through an early city. The streets are filled with the soft sounds of daily life, the clatter of pottery, the murmur of conversation, and the occasional laughter of children. Women move through the homes and communal spaces, tending to tasks that ensure the city continues to function. Every act, no matter how small it may appear, supports the larger structure of society. And for those who wish to explore more of these hidden stories, to follow the quiet threads of history that have been overlooked, continuing along this journey night after night can reveal the richness of the past. Trade and craft specialization flourished in these early cities. Women often played key roles in producing textiles, weaving baskets, and preparing food for trade. These goods not only supported local communities, but also allowed connections to form between distant settlements. Through trade, techniques, ideas, and cultural practices spread. Women's knowledge and labor were essential in maintaining these networks, demonstrating once again that their influence extended beyond the immediate household to the broader society. The development of legal and administrative systems in these cities also reflected the centrality of daily life and organization. While laws and decrees often focus on property, punishment, and authority, they implicitly relied on the routine management of households and communal responsibilities. Women's labor in organizing, storing, and distributing resources underpinned the very ability of these systems to function. Without this work, early urban life would have been unstable, and the promise of civilization would have faltered. In addition to domestic and economic contributions, women's roles in education and transmission of cultural knowledge were critical. Knowledge of planting cycles, medicinal plants, and ritual practices was passed from mother to daughter, forming a continuous chain of practical and spiritual understanding. This transfer of knowledge ensured that communities could endure challenges, adapt to new environments, and maintain traditions over generations. As night deepens and your mind grows calmer, consider the quiet power of these contributions. Civilization is often imagined as grand monuments and heroic deeds, but the reality is that it is built upon steady, patient work, guided by those who sustain life. Women, through their care, organization, and wisdom, shaped the first cities, the first communal laws, and the first shared cultural practices. Their influence continues to ripple through history, even when it is not recorded in texts. And now, as you drift further into rest, imagine yourself returning through the streets of these early cities. The soft light of the hearths, the warmth of the homes, the rhythms of daily tasks, all carry the presence of women who built and maintained civilization. For those who enjoy uncovering these quiet truths and wish to follow along through more nights of calm exploration, continuing on this journey can offer a steady stream of forgotten history, bringing the past into the present in a soothing and uninterrupted flow. Every small act in these ancient communities mattered. From tending fires to weaving, from planting seeds to preparing meals, the work of women was the foundation upon which the stability and growth of early civilizations rested. As you continue listening, let this awareness settle gently in your mind, providing a sense of calm and connection to the earliest human societies, where life was nurtured, maintained, and guided quietly but profoundly by women. The story of early civilization continues in the calm unfolding of time. As cities grew and states emerged, life became increasingly complex, requiring careful coordination and planning. People developed systems to manage food production, trade, and communal activities. These systems allowed larger populations to survive and flourish in ways that small villages could not. Yet, at the heart of these developments, the steady work of women remained essential. Through household management, agricultural knowledge, and the transmission of skills, women ensured that early societies could endure and expand. Early states in Mesopotamia, such as Sumer and Akkad, provide examples of how complex social organization developed. Temples, administrative buildings, and workshops indicate a structured society with specialized roles. While male leaders and priests often held visible authority, the underlying stability depended on women. They prepared food, organized households, maintained knowledge of planting cycles, and raised children. These contributions formed the invisible infrastructure of society, without which the visible achievements could not exist. Religion also played a central role in maintaining social cohesion. In these early civilizations, goddesses continued to occupy important positions in spiritual life. Temples dedicated to fertility, agriculture, and domestic prosperity suggest that female deities were revered for their connection to life and continuity. Women were often responsible for performing rituals, caring for sacred spaces, and passing down religious knowledge. Their participation ensured that spiritual practices remained consistent and meaningful, reinforcing both cultural identity and community stability. The economy of early cities relied heavily on the production and distribution of essential goods. Women contributed significantly to food preparation, textile production, and pottery creation. These activities were not merely domestic tasks, they were critical to sustaining communities and enabling trade. Exchange networks expanded, linking cities across regions. The expertise of women in crafting and managing resources allowed these networks to function efficiently, further demonstrating their indispensable role in the growth of civilization. Education and knowledge transmission were also part of women's contributions. Skills related to agriculture, household management, medicine, and ritual practice were taught within families and communities, often from mother to daughter. This continuous chain of knowledge allowed societies to maintain traditions, adapt to environmental changes, and develop cultural practices over generations. The stability of early civilizations depended on this ongoing transmission of essential skills and wisdom. Archaeological evidence supports the importance of women in early urban life. Domestic artifacts, figurines, and symbolic objects illustrate the integration of women into both practical and spiritual spheres. Homes were organized to accommodate extended families and communal activities, often reflecting a recognition of women's central role. Pottery, weaving tools, and storage facilities show that daily life was structured around the contributions of women, whose labor ensured the survival and prosperity of the community. Social rituals continued to play a critical role. Festivals marking planting and harvest cycles, ceremonies honoring deities, and communal gatherings reinforced shared values and responsibilities. Women often coordinated these activities, ensuring that each generation learned the customs and practices that would sustain the community. These traditions provided continuity, stability, and a sense of identity, weaving the fabric of society together in ways that were both practical and spiritual. Even as political structures evolved, women's contributions remained foundational. Legal codes and administrative systems assumed the continuation of domestic labor, food preparation, and caregiving. Without these consistent practices, early cities and states could not maintain stability or growth. The labor of women provided the structure necessary for governance, trade, and cultural expression to flourish. The quiet persistence of women's work extended beyond individual households. It connected neighborhoods, villages, and entire regions. Through shared knowledge, coordinated labor, and communal rituals, women created networks of continuity that underpinned early civilizations. This enduring influence shaped the evolution of society, ensuring that even as new political and military powers emerged, the core functions of survival and culture remained intact. As you listen and relax, imagine yourself walking through one of these early cities. The sun is rising, women are preparing food, tending to domestic animals, and maintaining fires. Children are learning skills and customs from their mothers. The rhythms of life move slowly but steadily, echoing the fundamental structure of society. Civilization is not only monumental buildings or rulers' achievements, it is the continuous, patient work of countless individuals whose contributions often go unrecorded. Let your mind rest on the quiet strength of these communities. Each act, each task, each daily routine contributes to the persistence of civilization. Women, through their labor, knowledge, and care, provide the stability upon which societies are built. In this calm understanding, you can see that civilization emerges not only from leadership or conquest, but from the steady, enduring work of those who sustain life and culture quietly, day after day. The story continues in the quiet corridors of history, as early cities expanded and the structures of society grew more complex. Settlements became centers of production, trade, and culture. Streets were lined with homes, workshops, and communal spaces, and the rhythms of daily life became more intricate. Yet beneath the visible structure of governance and leadership, the essential work of women continued to sustain the community. The management of households, preparation of food, and care of children remained the backbone of urban life, ensuring that each generation could build upon the achievements of the previous one. In these early cities, women's contributions extended beyond domestic duties. They were deeply involved in craft production, weaving, pottery, and textile creation. These items were necessary for everyday life and also served as trade goods. Artisanship was not merely functional, it carried cultural significance. Patterns and designs reflected community values, spiritual beliefs, and social identity. Women's hands shaped both the practical and aesthetic dimensions of society, ensuring that the community thrived materially and culturally. The presence of goddesses and female symbols in early art reflects the continuing centrality of women in spiritual life. Statues, figurines, and wall paintings often depicted female figures associated with fertility, wisdom, and protection. These symbols were integrated into homes, shrines, and communal spaces, creating an environment where women's contributions were recognized and celebrated in both visible and symbolic forms. Through these depictions, early societies acknowledged the role of women as life-givers and sustainers of the community. Education and knowledge transmission were further expanded in these urban centers. Mothers taught daughters and sons about agriculture, food preparation, craft production, and domestic management. Women guided children in the rituals and traditions of the community, ensuring that knowledge of survival, spirituality, and social norms was passed down faithfully. This continuous transmission of skills and values allowed communities to endure, adapt, and grow, providing stability amid the challenges of urban life. Trade networks connected early cities to one another, creating opportunities for cultural exchange. Women were often key participants in these networks, producing goods, preparing items for exchange, and passing along knowledge about techniques and materials. The spread of pottery styles, textile patterns, and food preparation methods across regions illustrates the impact of women's work on shaping broader cultural practices. Their contributions were foundational to the development of early economies and the spread of ideas across civilizations. The organization of urban life required cooperation and coordination, and women were essential in maintaining these functions. They managed households, supervised resource distribution, and cared for the young and the elderly. These daily acts, though often invisible in written records, formed the framework upon which social hierarchies and governance structures were built. Without the steady, patient work of women, early cities would have struggled to maintain order, stability, and growth. Religious and ceremonial life remained intertwined with women's roles. Festivals, seasonal rituals, and household ceremonies were often organized or guided by women. These events reinforced social cohesion, transmitted cultural knowledge, and maintained a connection between communities and their natural surroundings. Women's participation in these practices ensured the continuity of tradition, providing both practical and spiritual support to the society. As early states developed, legal and administrative systems became more formalized. These systems assumed the ongoing performance of essential domestic tasks and resource management, tasks primarily carried out by women. By sustaining households and communities, women provided the foundation necessary for law, trade, and governance to function effectively. Their labor was the invisible support that allowed societies to thrive, grow, and endure challenges over time. Visualize the daily life of one of these early cities. Women prepare meals over steady fires, care for children, weave baskets and textiles, and maintain the smooth operation of households. Their work is continuous and patient, forming the basis for social stability. Men may govern, trade, or defend, but the continuity of daily life rests upon women's labor. Civilization, in this light, is not a product of conquest alone, but of the quiet, persistent efforts of women whose influence permeates every aspect of society. As the night deepens, allow your mind to drift through these streets and homes. Hear the soft sounds of life, the tapping of a loom, the stirring of food, the murmured instructions of mothers to children. Civilization emerges gradually through these small, consistent acts, repeated over generations. Women, through their care, skill, and wisdom, form the enduring foundation upon which all subsequent human achievements are built. In this understanding, history is revealed not just through rulers or monuments, but through the quiet, persistent work of those who sustain life day after day. Time flows gently as we continue to explore the quiet development of early civilizations. Cities grew steadily, organized around rivers, fertile lands, and trade routes. People built structures to protect their communities, store surplus food, and accommodate craft production. Each settlement developed its own rhythms, guided by the cycles of nature and the necessities of daily life. At the heart of these communities, women continued to play a vital role, sustaining households, nurturing children, and ensuring that the threads of continuity were maintained across generations. In early Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and along the Yellow River, urban life required careful organization. Women managed domestic spaces, prepared food, and oversaw the care of children. Their labor provided stability in a world of growing complexity. The ability to maintain households, teach skills, and organize daily routines allowed communities to expand, trade, and develop more intricate social structures. These foundational contributions, though often unrecorded in written history, were critical to the survival and flourishing of early states. Religious life remained deeply intertwined with daily existence. Goddesses and female figures continued to occupy central positions in spiritual practice. Temples, shrines, and sacred spaces were maintained and organized by women. Rituals often revolved around fertility, the harvest, and the cycles of life. These ceremonies reinforced social cohesion and provided a framework for cultural continuity. By guiding these practices, women ensured that communities remained connected to both their spiritual and practical needs. The economy of early civilizations relied on domestic production and craft specialization. Women produced textiles, pottery, baskets, and other essential goods. These items were vital for daily life and for trade, linking communities across regions. Knowledge of weaving, pottery making, food preparation, and resource management was passed from one generation to the next, ensuring that each community could sustain itself and adapt to changing circumstances. Women's labor created the foundation for these economic and cultural networks. Education and the transmission of knowledge continued to be centered in domestic spaces. Mothers and elder women taught children skills related to survival, agriculture, craft production, and ritual practice. This continuous flow of knowledge allowed societies to endure environmental challenges, maintain traditions, and develop cultural cohesion. Without this sustained transfer of skills, early civilizations would have lacked the stability required to grow and prosper. Trade and communication networks expanded, connecting cities and regions. Women often facilitated these exchanges by preparing goods, producing craft items, and sharing knowledge about production techniques. The spread of cultural practices, artistic styles, and technical skills depended upon their contributions. These networks strengthened regional cohesion and allowed societies to adapt to new influences, demonstrating that women's labor and knowledge were integral to the wider development of civilization. Social organization became more complex as populations grew. Legal codes, administrative structures, and leadership roles assumed the continuation of domestic tasks and community management. Women's consistent work in these areas allowed cities to function effectively, providing a stable environment for governance, trade, and cultural development. Their labor formed the invisible infrastructure supporting every aspect of civic life. Consider the daily rhythm of these early urban centers. Women rise with the sun, tend fires, prepare food, care for children, and manage the household. Craft production, food preservation, and resource organization occupy much of the day. Throughout, rituals and religious practices are woven seamlessly into daily routines, with women often leading or guiding these activities. Their work ensures continuity, stability, and the preservation of culture, forming the underlying structure that supports larger social and political systems. Even as monumental architecture, governance, and written records highlight the visible achievements of early states, the quiet, patient labor of women forms the foundation beneath these achievements. Every act of care, every meal prepared, every child nurtured contributes to the endurance of society. Civilization, in essence, is built upon the steady, consistent work of those who sustain life daily. As your mind drifts through the streets and homes of these early cities, hear the quiet rhythm of daily activity. Imagine the soft sounds of weaving, the preparation of meals, the murmured instructions from mother to child. Every task, every routine, every act of care supports the life of the community, forming a continuous thread through time. Civilization emerges not only from leaders or monumental achievements but from the persistent, often unseen work of women who sustain, nurture, and guide communities across generations. The story of early civilizations draws to a gentle close, though the rhythms of life continue uninterrupted. In these first states and cities, daily life was structured around both practical and spiritual needs. Women, as they had been for thousands of years, remained at the center of these communities, ensuring that food was prepared, children were nurtured, and households functioned smoothly. Their labor, though often unseen in the chronicles of kings and rulers, was essential to the endurance and stability of society. As cities became more sophisticated, trade, agriculture, and craft production flourished. Women continued to contribute in countless ways, weaving textiles, preparing food, making pottery, and managing the distribution of resources. Their work created the foundation upon which the first administrative and governance structures could operate. Every act of care, every task performed, and every lesson passed to the next generation strengthened the fabric of society. Those who wish to quietly follow these stories, uncovering the hidden threads of history, may find themselves returning night after night to explore more of these gentle truths. Religious and spiritual practices remained deeply connected to women's roles. Goddesses representing fertility, protection, and wisdom were central to early belief systems. Rituals often involved the active participation of women, who guided ceremonies, prepared offerings, and passed sacred knowledge to younger generations. These practices helped maintain community cohesion, reinforced social norms, and connected daily life to the natural cycles of the earth. Women's influence on both practical and spiritual life ensured the continuity of these societies, shaping traditions that would endure for millennia. As cities expanded and social hierarchies became more complex, the contributions of women remained foundational. Administrative systems assumed the consistent performance of domestic and community tasks, largely carried out by women. The smooth operation of markets, temples, and households depended on their skill, organization, and knowledge. Although written records often highlight rulers, warriors, and monumental achievements, the quiet labor of women formed the essential support system, allowing civilization to grow and endure. Consider the daily rhythm in these urban centers. The sunrise brings a flurry of activity. Women tend fires, prepare meals, weave baskets and textiles, and care for children. Men may govern, defend, or trade, yet the continuity of life depends on women's work. Craft production, food preservation, and household management are integrated into the daily routines of the city. The cumulative effect of these activities sustains the community, allowing complex social, political, and economic systems to develop. Trade networks connected distant settlements, allowing the exchange of goods, techniques, and ideas. Women's expertise in production and resource management was critical in sustaining these networks. Their contributions facilitated the spread of cultural practices, artistic styles, and practical knowledge across regions. Through their labor and wisdom, women shaped not only their own communities but also the broader development of early civilizations. Education and knowledge transmission continued within households. Skills related to agriculture, craft, domestic management, and ritual practice were passed from one generation to the next. Women guided children in these essential tasks, ensuring that cultural continuity was preserved. The stability and growth of early cities depended on this steady transmission of knowledge, allowing communities to adapt and thrive in a changing world. Even as monumental architecture, governance, and formal writing systems became prominent, the influence of women remained central. Every meal prepared, every task completed, every lesson taught contributed to the continuity of society. Civilization was built gradually, through patient, consistent labor, much of which remains unseen in historical texts. The persistent work of women ensured that communities endured, adapted, and flourished over generations. As you listen and drift further into rest, imagine walking through these ancient cities. Hear the soft sounds of daily life, the crackle of hearths, the rhythm of weaving, the quiet guidance of mothers teaching their children. Every routine, every small task, every act of care supports the survival and growth of the community. For those who wish to quietly explore these hidden truths, following the gentle currents of history can reveal a deeper understanding of civilization and its foundations. By returning to these stories night after night, one can uncover the subtle, enduring influence of women who shaped the earliest cities and communities. Finally, let your mind rest on this understanding. History is not only the deeds of rulers, warriors, or monumental achievements. It is the patient, continuous work of countless individuals, particularly women, who nurtured, sustained, and guided early civilizations. Their influence echoes through time, forming the quiet yet essential foundation of all human society. Civilization, in its earliest form, was built not solely on conquest or leadership, but on the gentle, persistent efforts of women whose work ensured that life endured, flourished, and was passed down across generations.